The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering longleaf pines of Whispering Pines Estates, through elongated, dancing shadows across lawns, maintained with a zeal that ranged from obsessive to merely adequate. My own patch of green, belonging to me, Morgan Bellwether, fell squarely into the latter category. It was tidy, certainly, grass-clipped, hedges conforming just barely to the mandated height, but my flower beds rioted with hardy native perennials, favoring resilience over the fussy, color-coordinated tyranny of annuals. The overall effect was more tamed wilderness than sculpted suburbia. This quiet refusal to fully embrace the prevailing aesthetic of militant neatness was, I knew, a source of profound, simmering irritation for Beatrice Sterling, the reigning, undisputed, and utterly self-assured empress of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Beatrice. Even her name sounded crisp and disapproving. A woman whose helmet of tightly sprayed blonde hair seemed an external manifestation of her rigidly constricted worldview. She viewed her role as HOA president not merely as administrative, but as quasi-divine. She was, in her own mind, the arbiter of taste, the guarantor of tranquility, the ultimate authority on acceptable suburban, living within the gates of Whispering Pines. Her pronouncements, delivered with the unshakable conviction of someone receiving direct celestial guidance on mulch depth and mailbox design, governed the minutiae of our lives. The precise Pantone shade of ecru permitted for garage doors, desert sand, not antique linen. Heaven forbid, the mandated seasonal rotation of approved wreath motifs, poinsettias, strictly forbidden after January 5th. The permissible decibel level of wind chimes all fell under her exacting purview. Within the hushed, often furtive, communication network of the neighborhood, texts exchanged behind cupped hands, whispers over fences, she was universally known, though naturally never addressed as such, simply as HOA Karen Prime. My personal transgressions against Beatrice's vision of suburban perfection were twofold. Firstly, there was the aforementioned lack of obsessive lawn enthusiasm. Secondly, and far more egregiously in her eyes, was my occupation. Tucked away at the very rear of my slightly larger than average lot, shielded from prying eyes by a tall, deliberately dense, and immaculately maintained privet hedge, resided Whispering Pines Wildlife Care. It was my licensed, state, and federally permitted, and frequently inspected skunk rehabilitation and breeding facility. My sanctuary, I often thought, standing amidst the quiet rustlings and soft nocturnal snuffles emanating from the clean, secure enclosures. This wasn't just a job, it was a calling, born from a deep love for misunderstood creatures and fueled by anger at the ignorance and cruelty that often led them to my door. I worked primarily with animals confiscated from the illegal exotic pet trade, terrified, often declawed or improperly descented creatures treated as novelties, or rescues needing specialized care due to injury, illness, or abandonment. My breeding program focused on developing docile temperaments in individuals deemed non-releasable due to their compromised scent glands or habituation, preparing them for crucial roles as educational ambassadors in wildlife centers or specialized, knowledgeable homes. For these specific animals, a safe, complete scent gland removal was performed by a qualified veterinarian, ensuring their well-being and suitability for their ambassadorial lives. It was demanding, meticulous, often emotionally taxing work, requiring patience, quiet dedication, and rigorous adherence to hygiene and safety protocols. The enclosures were Fort Knox secure, designed to prevent escape while offering the animals a calm, low-stress environment. Most neighbors, blessedly, remained unaware of the facility's specific nature. Shielded by that formidable hedge, I kept trimmed religiously to the absolute maximum height allowed by Beatrice's own bylaw. Anonymity was my shield, essential for the peace of the animals and my own sanity. Beatrice, however, seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability, perhaps honed through years of curtain-twitching surveillance, to sense anything that deviated from her narrowly defined norm. She couldn't see the enclosures, couldn't smell anything untoward. My cleaning protocols were legendary among wildlife rehabilitators, but she seemed to know something back there wasn't conforming. Her campaign against me had started subtly, insidiously. Anonymous notes left in my mailbox complaining the hedge needed trimming just days after its biannual shearing. Vague, passive-aggressive comments floated during HOA meetings about unidentified atmospheric disturbances or potentially unpleasant background odors sometimes perceived near my property line, claims demonstrably false given the prevailing wind patterns and the enclosed, filtered nature of the habitats. She'd tried, repeatedly, to introduce new bylaws prohibiting non-traditional, non-domesticated, or potentially odorous animals. Each attempt transparently aimed at me. Each attempt failed, shot down by the inconvenient fact that my licensed facility predated her presidency by several years and was legally grandfathered in. A point my patient but resolute lawyer had been forced to articulate to the board via strongly worded letters on more than one occasion. Her latest crusade, however, veered into new territory. Beatrice had recently attended a weekend Embrace Your Inner Light retreat in some overpriced desert spa and returned radiating the zealous glow of a new convert to the gospel of community wellness. She was now obsessed with mindfulness, positive energy flows, chakra alignment, and the apparently life-altering power of conducting yoga outdoors, preferably on someone else's property. A rambling, multi-page email complete with low-resolution photos of cacti and platitudes about vibrational harmony and email that subsequently crashed the HOA's notoriously antiquated server, announced the immediate launch of Whispering Pines Zen Zones. These zones, she declared, would be designated areas throughout the common grounds, and, here, the wording grew ominous. Select private properties identified as possessing uniquely conducive grounding energies, dedicated to quiet contemplation, group meditation, and communal, spiritual rejuvenation. Naturally, Beatrice alone possessed the intuitive sensitivity required to identify these energetic hotspots. My backyard, apparently, was radiating Zen like a spiritual beacon, shielded by its dense hedge, quiet, and backing onto the peaceful, undeveloped conservation easement. It fit Beatrice's vaguely defined criteria perfectly. She materialized at my back gate one sweltering afternoon, just as I was carefully measuring supplemental milk replacer for a trio of orphaned kits, their tiny blind faces peering up trustingly from their incubator. The sudden appearance of her sharp, judgmental features felt like a violation in itself. "Morgan," she began, her voice coated in a layer of artificial sweetness that failed to conceal the steel beneath. "I've been conducting an intuitive energy assessment of the neighborhood's subtle body grid." Translation, snooping again. "And it has become abundantly clear that your rear lawn area possesses a truly remarkable grounding quality. The earth energy there is exceptionally potent, very conducive to deep meditative practice and vibrational balancing." I carefully set down the tiny feeding syringe, resisting the urge to wipe it clean on her pristine white linen trousers. "My animals need calm, Beatrice, not your pseudo-spiritual babble and invasive energy assessments." Outwardly, I kept my expression neutral. "My lawn." "Indeed," Beatrice beamed. clasping her hands together as if receiving a divine transmission. The ley lines practically hum back there. It's palpable to anyone with sufficient sensitivity. Therefore, I have made an executive decision, as president, to designate it as the flagship location for our inaugural Saturday morning sunrise yoga and meditation circle. We shall commence this weekend, just a small, mindful gathering, perhaps 15 or 20 of us, connecting with the nurturing power of Gaia and setting intentions for collective harmony. My internal alarms didn't just clang, they screamed. 15 or 20 strangers, on my private lawn, mere feet from the enclosures housing easily stressed, vulnerable animals. Beatrice, I said, stepping deliberately out from the shade, planting myself firmly between her and any potential path towards my backyard. This is my private residence. It is not HOA common property. It is absolutely not available for group yoga sessions, meditation circles, ley line convergence parties, or any other activity. Especially, I added, my voice hardening, meeting her gaze directly. Given the extremely sensitive nature of the wildlife rehabilitation work I conduct directly adjacent to that lawn, these animals require absolute quiet and minimal disturbance. Her smile tightened, the sweetness curdling into annoyance. Oh, Morgan, don't be such a negative obstructionist. Think of the community. This is for the collective well-being. Imagine the infusion of positive, healing vibrations your property will receive. It's a blessing, truly. She waved a dismissive hand, her turquoise rings flashing. Besides, she added, resorting to her usual tactic of citing imaginary authority, the bylaws permit HOA-sponsored recreational and wellness activities in designated community spaces, and I am hereby designating this lawn a temporary community wellness sanctuary. This is not a community space. Beatrice, I repeated, enunciating each word with deliberate force, it is my private, fenced backyard. You do not have permission. You are explicitly denied permission to use it. Your group activity would cause significant stress to vulnerable animals under my care, potentially jeopardizing their recovery or suitability for educational programs. You are not welcome here. Find another Zen zone on actual common property. We'll be as quiet as falling cherry blossoms, she insisted breezily, utterly impervious to my concerns, her eyes already glazing over with self-satisfaction. Barely a rustle. You won't even know we're communing with the universal consciousness. She gave a sharp, decisive little nod, as if finalizing a treaty. Honestly, Morgan, your resistance to positive energy is quite telling. You should work on that. Namaste. And with that final dismissal, she turned on her heel and glided away down the path, leaving me standing there, trembling slightly with a mixture of disbelief and cold fury. She wouldn't dare, I told myself later that evening, trying to push down the rising tide of anxiety. Trespassing is illegal. Even she wouldn't risk the legal implications, the potential liability. But deep down, a cold knot of certainty formed. Beatrice operated in a bubble of privilege and entitlement so thick, laws and common courtesy often failed to penetrate. She genuinely believed her desires superseded anyone else's rights, especially mine, my quiet defiance, my refusal to bend to her will, my very existence with my stink farm. It infuriated her. This wasn't just about yoga, it was about asserting dominance. Saturday morning arrived bathed in the kind of brilliant, dew-kissed sunshine that seemed designed for maximum suburban smugness. Birds trilled obnoxiously cheerful melodies in the pines. I poured myself a large mug of strong coffee, determined to reclaim some semblance of peace before the day's work began. I retreated to my small flagstone patio, tucked behind the house. offering a screened view of the yard, but hidden from the street. I closed my eyes, inhaled the clean scent of pine and damp earth, and took a tentative sip. Thump, thump, thump. The soft, unmistakable sound of rubber yoga mats unfurling on grass, followed by the faint, discordant tinkle-tinkle of wind chimes catching a breeze where no wind chimes belonged. And then, Beatrice's voice, low, sonorous, imbued with a fraudulent serenity that made my skin crawl, beginning her guided meditation. Breathe in the radiant energy of the dawn. Breathe out all negativity, all resistance to joy. My eyes snapped open. Coffee sloshed, hot and stinging, onto my hand. The mug clattered onto the flagstones, forgotten. Disbelief warred with a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. She actually did it. I rounded the corner of the house, moving on silent feet, and froze, surveying the scene with a horrified, almost detached sense of violation. My backyard, my private sanctuary, the buffer zone protecting vulnerable animals, had been transformed into a low-rent New Age circus. At least 15, maybe 20 people, mostly women dressed in what looked like coordinating sets of expensive athleisure wear, were arranged on brightly colored mats strewn across my lawn. They were trampling the clover, perilously close to the delicate stems of my prize-winning David Austin roses. Several sets of bamboo wind chimes, adorned with faded feathers and cheap plastic crystals, dangled jarringly from the lower branches of my elegant Japanese maple. Sticks of incense, thick plumes of cloying patchouli and sandalwood smoke polluting the fresh morning air, had been stabbed directly into my turf like miniature, fragrant spears. And there, holding court at the front of the assembly, positioned near the exact center of my lawn as if it were her personal stage, stood Beatrice Sterling, eyes closed, hands pressed together in a parody of prayer. A smug, beatific smile plastered across her face. She was radiating self-satisfaction and misplaced spiritual authority. The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. This is not happening. A part of my brain insisted, but it was. My private space invaded. My explicit refusal ignored. My animals, potentially stressed by the proximity of so many strangers. The strange smells, the rhythmic chanting now starting up. The protective barrier I'd so carefully maintained had been breached by sheer, arrogant entitlement. The anger simmering inside me reached boiling point, hardening into a cold, sharp resolve. I strode onto the lawn, the damp grass cool beneath my bare feet. Beatrice, my voice cracked through the manufactured serenity like a whip. What is the absolute meaning of this invasion? Beatrice's eyes snapped open, a flicker of pure, unadulterated annoyance. The look of a queen interrupted during a vital decree flashed across her face before being hastily replaced by a mask of serene condescension. "Morgan," she hissed, her voice low but carrying, "kindly modulate your vibrational frequency. You are projecting disruptive energy into the collective meditative field. Please, step away. Get off my property." I bit out each word, my voice dropping to a low, steady growl that seemed to vibrate in the air. "Every single one of you." Now, my tone, if not my words, finally seemed to penetrate the bubble of Zen. Several yoga practitioners opened their eyes, looking around with dawning discomfort. A woman in the back nervously began to gather her water bottle. Miss S. Henderson, peeking from behind her kitchen curtain 2 doors down, looked horrified. Mr. Gable, across the street, paused his lawn edging, watching intently. The neighborhood was waking up to the drama. Beatrice, however, remained defiantly rooted. "We have discussed this, Morgan. she retorted, her voice regaining its icy edge. This is a vital HOA community wellness initiative. Your persistent negativity is precisely the kind of discordant energy we are gathered here to transmute. This is criminal trespassing, I stated flatly, taking another deliberate step forward. Ignoring the nervous shifting of the participants, I explicitly, clearly, unequivocally told you no. You were denied permission. You and your acolytes need to remove yourselves and your paraphernalia from my private property immediately. Before I call the police, don't be tedious and litigious, Beatrice scoffed, waving a dismissive hand towards me as if shooing away a fly. We are simply sharing in the abundant flow of positive prana. She closed her eyes again, pointedly ignoring me. Now, find your center, everyone. Visualize roots growing down from your feet, grounding you into Mother Earth's embrace. Ignore all external distractions, all discordant vibrations. She took another deep, pointedly serene breath. It was then, looking at her smug, oblivious face, that I knew reasoning was utterly futile. Beatrice inhabited a different reality, one where her whims were natural law. My gaze drifted past the oblivious yoga circle, past the incense smoke curling lazily in the still air, towards the dense, unwavering green wall of the privet hedge, the boundary, the shield, and behind it, the enclosures. And in one of those enclosures, Wally, the rescue skunk with the imperfectly removed scent glands and the exquisitely sensitive nervous system. Wally, who reacted to sudden loud noises or unexpected movements near his hutch with a tiny, involuntary, but remarkably potent residual puff. Not the full deluge, just a concentrated burst of pure essence of startled skunk, enough to make one's eyes water, enough to clear a room, enough, perhaps, to disrupt even the most determinedly serene Zen zone. My eyes narrowed slightly. I didn't plan it, not exactly. But as I watched, a woman near the back hedge, the same corner where Wally's hutch was located, attempted a particularly complex balancing pose, a variation of tree pose involving a precarious lean. She wobbled, her arms flailing like windmills, trying to steady herself. Her outstretched hand smacked hard against the thick leaves of the privet hedge, sending a visible shiver through the branches, right next to Wally's known resting spot. Oh, Wally. One thought, a strange mix of protective alarm and grim inevitability washing over me. Please don't. But Wally did, almost instantaneously, as if triggered by a silent alarm. A faint, shimmering disturbance seemed to rise from behind the hedge near the point of impact. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't steam. It was a barely visible puff of vapor, caught instantly by the gentle morning breeze that was, with perfect, almost comical timing, drifting directly towards the center of the yoga gathering. It arrived subtly at first, a fleeting, alien note weaving through the heavy sweetness of sandalwood and patchouli. A woman in the front row, deep in a meditative trance, wrinkled her nose without opening her eyes. Is someone making toast? She murmured drowsily. Another participant, closer to the hedge, sniffed the air, her brow furrowing. That's odd. Smells a bit like burning tires. Beatrice, annoyed by the murmuring, started to speak. Ladies, please not maintain focus. But focus was rapidly becoming impossible. The subtle, musky note blossomed, expanding outwards with astonishing speed, hitting the assembled group like a physical force, an invisible tsunami of pure, unadulterated skunk. It was pungent, acrid, eye-wateringly strong, clinging to the back of the throat, the primordial defense mechanism unleashed. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the Zen zone. Eyes flew open, wide with stunned disbelief, quickly morphing into sheer, unadulterated panic. "Oh my God, what is that?" a woman shrieked, scrambling backward, knocking over her metal water bottle with a clang. "Skunkits. Skunkrun," someone else screamed, leaping to their feet. Chaos erupted. Utter pandemonium. Serenity vanished in an instant, replaced by primal instinctive flight. Yoga mats became treacherous slip and slides. Wind chimes were ripped from branches as people fled blindly. Bodies collided. There were high-pitched screams, strangled gagging sounds, frantic coughs, the air filled with the sounds of panicked scrambling and the unmistakable aroma of terrified skunk. People stumbled through my rose bushes, heedless of thorns, desperate to escape the invisible, suffocating cloud that now seemed to permeate everything. "ITS on me? I can smell it on my clothes," one woman wailed, frantically batting at her expensive yoga top. "My hair! ITS in my hair!" another cried hysterically, clawing at her scalp as she ran. "I'm going to vomit," gasped a third, stumbling towards the street, hand clamped desperately over her mouth and nose. Beatrice Sterling stood frozen in the center of the maelstrom, a solitary island of white linen amidst the swirling chaos. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief, fury, and dawning horror as the pungent aroma fully registered, clinging to her like a shroud. Her carefully curated Zen zone had not merely been disrupted, it had been routed, fumigated, utterly annihilated by the Pepe Le Pew principle. I watched the frantic exodus, a grim, almost detached satisfaction settling deep within me. This, I thought, was natural consequences writ large and pungent, as the last of the panicked trespassers scrambled off my lawn, leaving behind a battlefield littered with abandoned mats, overturned water bottles, snapped incense sticks, and the occasional lost sandal. I took a deep breath of relatively clean air near the house and slowly began to walk towards the epicenter. Before stepping fully onto the lawn, I ducked back into my nearby service shed and pulled on a pair of heavy-duty, elbow-length nitrile gloves and my waterproof work boots, standard gear for handling messy situations, both literal and metaphorical. The visual was intentional. Beatrice finally jolted from her stupor, rounded on me as I approached, her face a mask of apoplectic rage, her perfect blonde perm seeming to vibrate with fury. "You!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You! You orchestrated this! This was a deliberate attack. You used your stink monsters. Assault. Biological warfare. I'll have you arrested." "Beatrice," I said, my voice remarkably calm, stopping a safe distance away, upwind. I held up my gloved hands slightly, a gesture both placating and practical. "Let's be perfectly clear. Your uninvited gathering trespassed on my private property. You ignored clearly posted private property, wildlife sanctuary signs. You disregarded my explicit verbal denial of permission. Your group's presence and activity stressed, sensitive, protected animals under my care." I gestured vaguely at the lingering, invisible cloud of odor. What happened next was an unfortunate, though entirely predictable, natural defensive reaction from a startled animal. A consequence of your actions, not mine. I allowed a small, cool smile. Considerate, an unscheduled, highly immersive, olfactory therapeutic experience, unique to the Whispering Pines Zen Zone initiative. Her eyes bulged. Spittle flew from her lips as she screamed, "I will sue you. I will ruin you. I will see those filthy, disgusting creatures seized and destroyed. I will have you run out of this town on a rail, Bellwether, you mark my words. Actually, Beatrice, I said, reaching into the deep pocket of my work overalls and retrieving the small, waterproof notepad and pen I used for logging animal behavior. I clicked the pen purposefully, considering the flagrant trespassing, the damage to my landscaping, the potential distress caused to endangered species rescues under federal guidelines, a slight stretch, but plausible, and the general disruption and emotional distress caused by your unauthorized event. I tapped the pen against the notepad thoughtfully. I believe it is you who owes me significant compensation. Let's call it the premium Zen Zone experience and remediation fee. Perhaps we can settle this now. I raised my eyebrows expectantly. Beatrice Sterling's answering shriek of incoherent fury was a thing of terrible beauty, almost powerful enough to momentarily eclipse the lingering aroma of eau de Wally. Almost. The aftermath unfolded like a messy, multi-act play, heavy on recrimination and light on zen. Beatrice, fueled by impotent rage, deployed her full arsenal of HOA weaponry, but found her ammunition ineffective against the triple shield of legal permits, witness testimony, and the undeniable stench of her own overreach. She called the police, again, ranting about being the victim of a premeditated noxious fume assault. The responding officers, bless their weary souls, listened with strained politeness, surveyed the wreckage of abandoned yoga mats, noted the prominent private property signs, reviewed my previous report detailing the denied permission, interviewed a few lingering, shell-shocked neighbors who confirmed the trespassing, and firmly declared it a civil matter. They issued Beatrice a stern, recorded warning about harassing me further and reiterated she was banned from my property. She then launched a renewed campaign with County Animal Services, demanding my facility be shut down, my animals confiscated, citing fabricated claims of negligence and public endangerment. Carol, the unflappable animal control supervisor, paid another visit. She meticulously reviewed my licenses, permits.vet records, and recent inspection reports, all spotless. She toured the facility again. Observing the animal's calm demeanor, Wally seemed quite recovered, and the impeccable condition of the enclosures. She concluded her visit by issuing Beatrice a second, more strongly worded warning regarding filing false complaints and potentially interfering with licensed wildlife rehabilitation activities, hinting at possible legal repercussions if the harassment continued. Beatrice's final stand was within the HOA itself. She demanded an emergency board meeting conducted via Zoom, as no one was keen on gathering physically yet, to impose the harshest possible sanctions against me, invoking obscure clauses about neighborhood nuisances and detrimental conduct. But her coup failed spectacularly. The skunking of the Zen Zone had become instant neighborhood legend. The participants, many related or socially connected to board members, were not only angry about their ruined Saturday morning and lingering olfactory trauma, but deeply embarrassed at having been led into an illegal trespassing situation. More damagingly, whispers about Beatrice using HOA funds for her personal wellness crusade had solidified into concrete accusations. The board, sensing a shift in the power dynamic and smelling an opportunity to finally dethrone the Empress, turned on her. The internal audit, initially prompted by suspicious whispers, moved forward with ruthless efficiency. It uncovered irrefutable evidence. Beatrice had indeed treated the HOA coffers like her personal slush fund. Thousands of dollars in unauthorized expenditures, bulk orders of obscure incense, wholesale yoga mats, subscriptions to dubious online spiritual guides, even partial reimbursement for her Sedona retreat, all charged to the HOA credit card or submitted via vague invoices. lacking proper approval or transparent documentation. Embezzlement. Plain and simple. Cornered. Facing financial ruin from potential lawsuits by the fumigated yogis. Stripped of her authority by the board and publicly humiliated. A rational person might have retreated, but Beatrice, consumed by narcissistic rage, made one final, catastrophic error in judgment. She crossed the Rubicon from petty tyrant to felon. 2 nights after the Zen Zone debacle, my upgraded security system, complete with infrared night vision and motion alerts, pinged my phone. The live feed showed a figure dressed in dark clothing, hunched over, creeping stealthily along the back perimeter of my property towards the privet hedge shielding the skunk enclosures. It was unmistakably Beatrice. In her hands, she carried a garden pump sprayer. She fumbled with the nozzle, raised it towards the base of the hedge, and appeared ready to spray when a neighbor's bright motion-activated floodlight suddenly blazed to life. Startling her, she dropped the sprayer, glanced around wildly, and then fled back towards her own yard, disappearing into the shadows. The abandoned sprayer, retrieved carefully by police the next morning, contained residue later confirmed by a lab to be a highly toxic cocktail of concentrated herbicide and industrial bleach, a mixture clearly intended to kill the hedge and likely poison any animal nearby. The high-definition video evidence was damning, chilling, and unambiguous. Armed with the crystal-clear security footage and the finalized HOA audit report detailing the embezzlement, the situation escalated rapidly beyond neighborhood disputes or civil claims. I filed a comprehensive police report detailing the attempted animal cruelty, criminal trespassing, felony vandalism, given the potential cost of replacing the mature hedge and the value of the protected animals, and presented the video evidence. Simultaneously, the HOA board, eager to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal and potentially recoup their losses, filed their own police report regarding the felony embezzlement. Beatrice Sterling's arrest was quiet but decisive. Her subsequent trial was less so, a predictable circus of denials, accusations, and attempts to portray herself as the victim of a vindictive conspiracy orchestrated by me and jealous board members. But the evidence was simply insurmountable. The irrefutable video of her poison plot, the meticulous financial records tracing the embezzled funds, the damning testimony of former board allies, and even the lingering resentment expressed by several witnesses who recounted their involuntary skunk aromatherapy experience. She was convicted on all counts. The judge, in sentencing, delivered a blistering rebuke, citing her profound abuse of power, her callous disregard for animal welfare, her deliberate violation of the law, and her complete lack of remorse. Beatrice Sterling was sentenced to 2 years in state prison, a term that reflected the severity of the combined offenses. Hefty restitution orders mandated she repay the HOA in full and cover all my legal costs and security upgrades. The ongoing civil suits from the traumatized yoga participants further decimated her finances. Unable to meet her staggering financial obligations, her meticulously maintained house in Whispering Pines, the very symbol of her former reign and obsession with appearances, was seized and sold. A palpable sense of relief settled over Whispering Pines estates, like the calm after a long, unpleasant storm. A new HOA board, refreshingly reasonable and committed to transparency, was elected. The thicket of nonsensical rules was pruned back, replaced with clearer guidelines emphasizing mutual respect and adherence to actual laws, not personal whims. My skunk facility, once a source of hushed controversy, became something of a neighborhood talking point, a symbol of resilience. Morgan Bellwether, the quiet skunk lady, The one who refused to bow to HOA Karen Prime had, through a bizarre twist of fate and olfactory intervention, inadvertently fumigated the rot right out of the community leadership. Sometimes, while tending the roses near the back hedge, roses which, miraculously, mostly survived the stampede, I still find a tiny, iridescent shard of glass from a shattered wind chime glittering in the mulch. A small reminder of the brief, bizarre period when my backyard served as Beatrice Sterling's involuntary Zen zone. I never did pursue that skunked spa guest inconvenience fee. The restoration of peace. The quiet enjoyment of my property without fear of harassment or invasion. Felt like compensation enough. Later that night, long after the house was quiet, and the only sounds were the gentle chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of pines in the breeze, I made my final rounds, flashlight beam dancing across the enclosures. I stopped at Wally's hutch. He was nestled deep in his straw bedding, a small striped ball of fur. He stirred at the light, blinking his bright, curious eyes. I knelt down and offered him a few extra large, juicy mealworms through the secure mesh, his absolute favorite treat. He sniffed them delicately, then took them with surprising eagerness, crunching contentedly. "Well done, Wally," I whispered softly, the flashlight beam illuminating his contented munching. Unintentional heroics definitely earn bonus worms. He finished the last one and gave a soft little snuffle, perhaps a skunk version of a thank you, before curling back up to sleep, utterly oblivious to the suburban chaos he had inadvertently quelled. Sometimes, I reflected, smiling in the darkness, the most effective solutions come from the most unexpected and uniquely fragrant sources. Nature, in its own mysterious way, had provided the perfect antidote to Beatrice Sterling.